Hi there, this is Professor Ellis with Science Fiction. This is week 3. I hope everyone is doing well, that you're staying safe from the virus, that you're able to take care of yourself and all your loved ones during this difficult time. And just before we get started with class, this is something that I would typically do and say whenever I would meet with students in person, is that just to remind you all to take care of yourselves right now. Make sure that you're getting plenty of rest, that you're eating well, that you're not getting too stressed out, that you find ways to take care of yourself, and both physically as well as mentally during these challenging times that we find ourselves in. That's key to being successful, not only in your classes but in the workplace. And eventually in your future careers. And any way that I can help with that as far as our class is concerned, you'll remember to keep me in the loop. So why don't we go ahead and get into today's class. We're going to be continuing to talk about Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, but we also have some other housekeeping stuff to take a look at with the syllabus. So to start off with, I just want to give you all a reminder to make sure that you have joined our class on OpenLab. I sent out that original email that gave you direct links to do that. Most everybody in the class has done so. And one of the keys to remember whenever you go to leave a comment for the weekly writing assignment, if you're logged into OpenLab and you're on our OpenLab course site, and you go to leave a comment, then you shouldn't have to enter your name and email address again in order to leave a comment. That means that you're logged in and it'll be recorded automatically who you are when you're leaving that comment for your weekly writing assignment. But if you see that it's asking for a username and password, you may think I'm not logged in right now. Look at the top right hand corner up here, and if you don't see your name, and there's an option to log in, then you need to log in again. Then you'll be active on OpenLab with your account, and if you've already joined the course, then you'll be able to leave that comment as normal. Now, looking at the syllabus on our OpenLab course site, I'm just going to zoom down to say this is week 3. We're going to be continuing Frankenstein today. And to give you a heads up for next week, you need to complete Frankenstein. That will be chapters 18 through 24. And right after chapter 24, there's also some concluding letters from Walton to his sister. So you need to read all that. So basically from chapter 18 to the end of the novel. And that'll wrap up your reading of the first science fiction work, which is Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And then also I'll remind you at the end of today's lecture, but just to say now, you'll have a 250-word weekly writing assignment. And again, with these weekly writing assignments, what I want to see you doing is using your notes. That I hope that you're using the Cornell method or some other method that you're comfortable with to make handwritten notes, which you'll be turning in later as a part of your midterm and final grade in the class. But you're using those notes to review not just what I talk about during lecture, but also the notes you're making on your own about the readings, right? You're making notes about the characters that you're encountering, maybe interesting points that you think are relevant to the way that the story turns on science and technology. And you're putting all that into your notebooks so that when you come to the weekly writing assignment, you say, well, what are some of the important things that just stand out both in my mind and also what I've put into my notes? And then you'll want to type those up in word processor of your choice. You use Google Docs, you can use Microsoft Word, Apple Pages, a text editor, doesn't matter. Type it up somewhere else, 250 words minimum. That's like 1 page double spaced of writing, not a whole lot of writing. But you can go over that if you want. I don't want you to think it has to be exactly 250 words. With this, think of this as writing practice. This is a way of improving your writing automatically. Now, our science fiction class is not a writing class per se. It does have the writing intensive designation, which is one of the reasons why I have you do these weekly writing assignments to meet the requirements for that. But I also know, and I fold this into my writing classes, so if you take one of my writing classes, you would hear me talk a lot more about this. But I know from research that there's a lot of evidence that the more that we do writing, the better we get at it automatically. And so there aren't really tricks that I can teach you to make you a better writer. Really what it takes is a lot of effort and hard work on each person's part to become a better writer by doing it a lot and doing it regularly. So it's not like you can just sit down like, okay, I'm gonna write for 12 hours today and you're gonna automatically get better at writing. That really it's about like staggering, developing it over time, and doing a certain amount along and along. Now, I'm telling you this, and you're probably thinking like, yeah, Professor Ellis is just making me do a lot of busy work. Well, this is something that I practice as much as I preach. So like if I go over to my blog, this is dynamicsubspace.net that I mentioned before. I started this blog back in 2006, 2007 because I wanted to get better at writing. I had gotten comments when I was an undergraduate at Georgia Tech that my writing sounded like it was written by a robot. That wasn't something that was told to me to make me feel good. That was a criticism of my writing. And so, I tried to find out like how to be a better writer. And one of the things that I found is that simply by doing writing about something interesting to me was a way for me to improve at it. Now, I wanted to also think, how can I do this kind of writing in a way that maybe I get additional benefits from it? Like not just simply keeping a diary that I'm the only person that looks at, but maybe I could use a blog, something that's public, as a way to do regular writing, but then also write about what I'm researching, write about what I'm learning in my classes. And so my blog was born out of like this need on my part to be a better writer, but then I also wanted to document and show maybe like potential schools that I might work for what kind of work I was doing, so that there would be this record. Essentially, pics or it didn't happen. I would have some record online of all the work that I had done, both from as an undergraduate at Georgia Tech, then as a master's student at the University of Liverpool, and then a PhD student at Kent State University. And so for yourselves, I would just recommend this, that if you also want to be working on your writing beyond what we're doing in class, and also want to begin creating some kind of record to show off what you know and what you've learned how to do in whatever your field is, you can start a blog. Or if you already have, like, say, a LinkedIn.com profile, you can post stories there, and you write up some of the things that maybe you found, like your links, and you give some commentary on it, or you make a record of some of the work that you've done in like labs or in special classes, as a way, again, to show off what you know how to do. Because as competitive as things are in the job markets for all of our respective fields, being able to show off what you can do and to show off that you're a good communicator through your writing adds a lot of value to you in the eyes of a potential employer. So again, these are things that I recommend to you. I'm not saying that you need to go out and start a blog today, but you can think of this weekly writing assignment as a corollary to that. It's something that I know will help you learn the material. It'll help improve your writing over time. And then you can also do some of this on your own if you want to start your own blog, etc. And you can, if you want me to look at some of that writing that you do elsewhere besides what you do on our Open Lab course site, send me a link. I'll be happy to give you some comments on that, because I think it's really beneficial for you to do that. So that's what we got coming up, and also some ideas that might help you work on your writing beyond what you're doing immediately in our class. All right, so we need to lecture some more on Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, really begin diving into what makes it science fiction. and then I'll give you a reminder about the weekly writing assignment and the reading assignment for your homework. All right, so before I talk about these narrative frames, I think this will overlap a little bit with last week's lecture, but I think it can be beneficial so you can look back in your notes and see where this connects with what I concluded on last week. So as a reminder, Mary Shelley, and remember her full name is Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, published her novel Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus. I'd like you to get that whole title, Frankenstein, comma, or, comma, The Modern Prometheus, Prometheus, Frankenstein or The Modern Prometheus. She originally published that in 1818, anonymously. Make sure you get that date, 1818, into your notes. Now, she published it anonymously because, as you can imagine, at that time, a story like this, there might have been some incredulity, or there may have been also backlash about like a woman writing a story like this. Now, its origins lie in June 1816 of the year without a summer. It was unusually cold that year. And you can look that up online. Look on Wikipedia, and you'll find some interesting things about what happened in that year. So in June 1816, Mary Shelley, her soon-to-be husband Percy Bysshe Shelley, the Romantic poet, who also was still married to Harriet Westbrook, and who was pregnant by her lover at the time, until she committed suicide late in 1816. Lord Byron, also a very important Romantic poet, Claire Clairmont, Mary Shelley's stepsister, and John Polidori, a writer and physician. So these people are all holed up in this place near the shores of Lake Geneva in Switzerland and they decide to have a competition. And back then there were no apps, there were no smartphones, so what kind of competition are you going to have? They decide that they're going to see who can come up with the best ghost story. And of their attempts, Mary Shelley's was the most successful and influential. Originally something just that she came up with to scare these people that she was staying with at Lake Geneva in Switzerland. But then she decided to put pen to paper and wrote the story down and expanded on it. And what we're reading in this class is the third edition of that novel. And this third edition was published in 1831. Now, if you remember from the syllabus, I gave you the link to it on Project Gutenberg. So you can be reading this online, a digital version of it, or you can also purchase it if you like. That's fine too. But with this copy, you can see here 1831, right here at the bottom. This is the title page of this scanned and typed out version of Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus, by Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. And also, as I mentioned, I think at the end of last week, is the story is told in an epistolary form. Make sure you get that term down, epistolary. And that's spelled E-P-I-S-T-O-L-A-R-Y, epistolary form. This means that it is told through letters between Captain Robert Walton and his sister, Margaret Walton Saville. Now, the letters that are exchanged between Captain Walton and his sister generate, we could say, narrative frames. This is also a term you want to put into your notes, narrative frames. Now, what narrative frames are the way that the story is being constructed and conveyed to the reader. You could think of it as the point of view that is being given at a particular point in the story. And so you can see on the screen here, I've drawn out these narrative frames for you. So first off, we have Walton's introduction. And these are those initial letters between him and his sister. So that's the outside frame, the outside box that I've drawn here, Walton. Then Walton encounters Victor Frankenstein, stranded on the ice as Walton's ship is going up into the Arctic. And then Victor Frankenstein tells his story to Walton. So now Victor Frankenstein is a box within Walton's larger box. Victor Frankenstein's narrative is a frame within Walton's larger frame. Now, as a part of Victor Frankenstein's narrative being told to Walton, Victor Frankenstein tells the creature's narrative that the creature had told to Victor Frankenstein when they're on Mont Blanc in the Alps, in the storm. So now the creature has a frame of his narrative, what he experienced, and what he then told to Victor Frankenstein in that larger frame, which is in turn then told to Walton in that largest frame. Then we get at the end of the novel Walton's conclusion, which again are letters between him and his sister. And the whole story you can think of as just being letters that Walton was writing down as these stories are told to him. But then at the very end, there's also, and you see this smaller frame for the creature that is told directly to Walton after. And I'm sorry about the spoilers here for those of you who haven't read it all the way to the end. But it's important to go ahead and lay this out that after Victor has died, the creature comes to Walton's ship and he laments. This is an important word that you ought to know. Lament, L-A-M-E-N-T. It means to be sorrowful about something, to talk about a loss, something that you wish you still had that you've lost. So the creature laments the passing of his creator, Victor Frankenstein. But because the creature is talking directly to Walton, who's come into the cabin and is like, what the hell's going on here? The creature speaks directly to Walton. So this is another frame for the creature that's directly to Walton. It's not the creature relaying his story to Victor Frankenstein and then it being related from Victor to Walton. It's off to the side because the creature is talking directly to Walton in that final scene of the novel. So these frames, you might want to jot them down into your notes, draw them out, so to help wrap your mind around how the story is being told, because this is a more complicated way for telling a story, I think, rather than just this is the things that happened. That it's these different characters relaying the story from their own point of view, but via different characters that are in the story. So these are Frankenstein's narrative frames. Now, what are some of the things that make Frankenstein science fiction and make it the first science fiction novel? So first off, Frankenstein is what I call a science-saturated novel. Science-saturated. You know the word saturated. It means something is all absorbed, something that's overflowing. It's a whole bunch of it. So it's a science-saturated novel. It is the first novel that demonstrates a choice made between the pre-scientific and the scientific. So there's a choice that's made between the pre-scientific and the scientific. And its plot hinges on the new sciences of biochemistry, anatomy, and galvanism. Galvanism is spelled G-A-L-V-A-N-I-S-M. I'll talk more about that in a minute. Its characters, Victor, Walton, and the creature, all three of them, are all scientists of a kind, driven by curiosity. They want to know things. Walton goes on his voyage of discovery to find what attracts the compass needle, or magnetism. He wants to, quote, regulate 1,000 celestial observations, end quote, and find a new path to the Americas. Essentially, he wants to go where no man has gone before. And where have we heard that before? From Star Trek, right? I mean, it's something that's contemporary, that's borrowing from this long past. Note, however, the influence of Romanticism on Walton. This connects to the previous lecture when I talked about what Romanticism was as a reaction to the Age of Enlightenment. Walton says in the beginning that he was a poet for a while, and he writes, quote, "I shall commit my thoughts to paper, it is true, but that is a poor medium for the communication of feeling." Because remember, everything about Romanticism is like you observe the outside world, take it into your mind, and then you convey like your experience of it, the emotional impact, all that through poetry. Now, this I may have mentioned in the last lecture, but I'll say it again. The introduction by Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley and the original preface by Percy Bysshe Shelley mention Dr. Darwin. And who is this Darwin that they're referring to? They're referring to Charles Darwin, I hope you know about from both history and from your biology classes as the figure that gave us the idea of evolution. So they're referring to Charles Darwin's grandfather. Okay, so this is before Charles Darwin. His grandfather's named Erasmus Darwin, Erasmus, Erasmus Darwin. And he was a natural philosopher. Natural philosopher is a term that was given to people who today we would consider scientists. But they were also engaged in a lot of other intellectual pursuits. So he was a natural philosopher in whose ideas can be found the kernels of thought that his grandson Charles then nurtures to maturity with his theory of evolution. I'll also note that Erasmus was an atheist, like Mary Shelley's father. But Mary Shelley's father and Erasmus Darwin never actually met, but they were attacked together in the press and by government, etc., and church as atheist writers. Now, I mentioned the term galvanism. This is very important to understanding part of what's going on in Frankenstein. So biological galvanism is the application of electrical current to muscles to elicit their contraction. Today we call this electrophysiology. 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 Now, galvanism was state-of-the-art science during Mary Shelley's teenage years. The scientist Luigi Galvani, L-U-I-G-I, Luigi Galvani, G-A-L-V-A-N-I, is the scientist who experimented on this phenomenon with dissected animals in the late 1700s. And so the idea was like here you could have like a stone dead animal, and you have some sort of electrical apparatus, a battery, and you apply current to the muscles of that dead animal, and you would see like the arms flop around, the legs flop around, the body convulse. And at the time they didn't fully understand what was going on, but you could see how this plants an idea in Mary Shelley's mind as potentially a way to reanimate dead things, that we could bring life back to the dead, perhaps. And this is one of the things about science fiction, is to take an idea from science and then extrapolate to see, like, if you were to extend the idea further, what might it mean? What might it be capable of? And not just simply, taking that idea and imagining like how much better it could be improved, but also thinking about what effect that might have on other people. What effect might the potential of this invention or this science have on society? And this is kind of the key innovation that Mary Shelley makes with this, and as it applies to what we now call science fiction. So some other aspects of this being a science-saturated novel. We have Victor Frankenstein, and he chooses rationality and the scientific method over alchemy and magic. If you remember, his professors are just blown apart when they learn that he's been studying these alchemists, these pre-scientific thinkers who were trying to transmute metals and other nonsense. And he realizes, despite being chewed out about this, that the way forward is to use the power of science. Whereas with alchemy, it was, obviously there was no repeatability of the experiments. There was no way to verify that these things actually worked. You could always write things off, that maybe I didn't do the incantations right, maybe I didn't mix the chemicals right. Whereas with science, you were able to develop experimental methods. You were able to test hypotheses that if you did everything one way and did it again exactly the same way, the results would be repeatable. And so Victor is introduced to this when he goes to Ingolstadt at the university and embraces it. Rationality in the scientific method over alchemy and magic. Also, he sets his sights to discover what generates life and to answer the question, how is inanimate matter animated with life? He wants to discover that, and he sees the science that he's learning as the key to that. And in particular, he's studying chemistry at Ingolstadt. So we see chemistry being a big part of this, but then on his own, he also studies physiology and anatomy. And this is kind of a dirty business that Victor is becoming involved in, because if you're going to be studying physiology and anatomy, of human bodies, you're going to have to use cadavers. You're going to have to go, if you imagine at that time, go to the graveyard and dig someone up, or pay someone to give you the materials for your research. And so you can imagine both the grotesqueness of what he's doing, of the materials he's using of dead matter from dead bodies, the smell, the fluids, everything you can imagine is a very dirty business that Victor Frankenstein is engaged in when he really begins his pursuit to build his creature. And we can also compare Victor's pursuit of reanimating dead matter and his desire to find the secret to immortality. If we go all the way back, and I mentioned in the earlier lecture, with Gilgamesh's search for eternal life. So Victor is very much tied into this idea of finding immortality, but whereas Gilgamesh was pursuing this through exploring the world in a mythical setting, whereas with Victor Frankenstein, he is using science to try to uncover this. But now, Walton and Victor are not the only scientists. We also have Victor's creation, the creature. And pay close attention to my specific use of naming the creature. He doesn't really have a name in the story. And he's certainly not, as in popular culture sometimes conflates or mashes up Victor Frankenstein and Frankenstein's last name with the creature. The creature is not Frankenstein. Victor Frankenstein is the creator, and then he creates the creature. But the creature himself is a scientist of sorts. He employs inductive reasoning, inductive, which is where you take a particular experience and apply it to general situations in order to try to figure things out. He uses deductive reasoning, deductive, deductive reasoning, which is where you take general experiences and apply them to solving something that's a particular example. And then third, he's also rational. He figures things out, he tests his hypotheses, he reflects on the results of what he's tried out, and then he tries again if he can. But sometimes we see, such as his experience with the DeLacy's, he tries something to connect with them, it goes terribly wrong, and then he reflects when he escapes back to his hiding place to try to make amends and do right the next time. But unfortunately, he doesn't have a chance to because the DeLacy's move away. They're too scared out of their mind after encountering the creature. Now, another aspect of this being a science-saturated novel is the biology of mind and something called the tabula rasa. This comes from Latin, tabula rasa. So there's this philosophical and scientific debate that fuels this part of the novel, this biology of mind, and in particular the creature's mind is what I'm talking about. And if you think, also I've mentioned this word before, natural philosophers, in reference to Erasmus Darwin and others. So you can think of how like scientists are also philosophers. They wear multiple hats at this time as they're trying to figure out both how to do science and what it is, but also the larger ramifications of what or how to explain the world and all these aspects that they're trying to uncover with science. And what's key to this biology of mind is, does the human brain have any information inherent, like when the baby is born, when the creature is made, or is the human brain a blank slate or a tabula rasa? So tabula rasa in Latin means blank slate. And so when I say slate, it's like chalkboard, right? Is it blank, or does it already have some things written on it, some inherent information? So Mary Shelley seems to side with the philosopher Locke, Locke, who was an empiricist. The empiricists of the theory of biology of mind are ones that believe that the mind was a blank slate, was a tabula rasa, and we acquire language and knowledge through empirical trial and error, that we learn language and other things through our experience. We figure things out. But now the empiricists are opposed to, or there's another, they're debating with another group who we can call the rationalists. The rationalists. And these include the philosopher Descartes, cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am guy. The rationalists, I think today, have won out in the end. In terms of, there's a lot of evidence that there is a certain amount of inherent, not necessarily knowledge, but there are built-in aspects to our mind that enable us to acquire things like language very quickly at a certain window of time in our development. But these are things that Mary Shelley didn't know about at that time, and others didn't know about. Something came along much later. But I would say that perhaps Mary Shelley sided with the empiricists because at that time, that view did not require the intervention of a soul, which is how the rationalists at that time saw this inherent ability or inherent aspects to the brain, the things that were already known, like where did it come from? And at that time, there was the idea that there was a soul that gave the inanimate matter of the body access to this. I think for our purposes, I'm going to skip over some of this lecture that I have about Descartes and the pineal gland, or what he called the Conarion, Conarion. Very interesting stuff, but not absolutely necessary, I think, for you to know to really engage with Frankenstein's narrative. Though I will say, I got this one quote. This is from 1972, and this relates to two very important linguists or semiotics professors and people that study language and representation of ideas in language. That you might look up on your own after I read this quote. But this is something involving Noam Chomsky, very important figure, Noam Chomsky, who has both done work on linguistics and semiotics, as well as a lot of other things, a lot of very public intellectual stuff. Noam Chomsky has done. So a very important figure. But in 1972, John R. Searle, Searle, who is also a linguist, says of Noam Chomsky's revolution in linguistics, quote, "The most spectacular conclusion about the nature of the human mind that Chomsky derives from his work in linguistics is that his results vindicate the claims of the 17th century rationalist philosophers Descartes, Leibniz, and others, that there are innate ideas in the mind. The rationalists claim that human beings have knowledge that is not derived from experience, but is prior to all experience and determines the form of the knowledge that can be gained from experience. The empiricist tradition, by contrast, from Locke down to contemporary behaviorist learning theorists, has tended to treat the mind as a tabula rasa, blank slate, containing no knowledge prior to experience and placing no constraints on the forms of possible knowledge, except that they must be derived from experience by such mechanisms as the association of ideas or the habitual connection of stimulus and response. For empiricists, all knowledge comes from experience. For rationalists, some knowledge is implanted innately and prior to experience. In his bluntest moods, Chomsky claims to have refuted the empiricists and vindicated the rationalists. End quote. So, at the heart of all of this that you should be thinking about, as far as Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley is concerned, in writing the character of the creature, is that the creature, once he is given life by Victor Frankenstein's science, that he has a blank slate, but he is able to use rationality, this basic reason that all human beings, both the empiricists and the rationalists, would agree existed. That by application of rationality, the creature is able to figure everything out, to fill the blank slate with his observations, and to observe things so that he can learn language and how to read and how to do different kinds of work. So he begins with that blank slate, but then is quickly able to use his rationality to figure things out and become a complete, knowledgeable person. Not necessarily what we would say is human being, because he seems to be viewed as a distinct creature, not directly related to human beings. They keep referring to creature, creating a new race of beings. Whenever he asks Victor Frankenstein to create a mate for himself, all of these things. So that's biology of mind and the tabula rasa that I want you to be thinking about. Some other aspects to the novel that you should be familiar with is hubris. Hubris. Hubris is presumption, or behavior perceived as arrogant, disrespectful, and transgressing the limits of what is permitted or appropriate. It is pride and excessive self-confidence. From Greek mythology, hubris is presumption or arrogance towards the gods. Nemesis, the inescapable, would avenge and punish those seen as hubristic. Prometheus, who I mentioned before in previous lecture, had hubris towards Zeus, who had decreed humanity did not deserve fire. Prometheus thought he knew better than the king of the gods, and he was punished by Nemesis for giving fire to humanity and for his arrogance towards Zeus. In the King James Version of the Bible, Proverbs 16:18 states, quote, "Pride goeth before destruction, and an haughty spirit before a fall." End quote. This is directly relating to one's fall due to hubris. And so in terms of the story, Frankenstein exhibits hubris. Frankenstein thinks his insight and discoveries give him the superior authority to decide to create his creature. He does not stop to think about his act's ramifications to others or his duty toward the creature as its creator. The creature then serves as Frankenstein's nemesis, the inescapable agent of someone's downfall. And if we want to think in popular terms, a nemesis can be seen as an arch enemy. So the creature becomes Frankenstein's nemesis, the inescapable agent of Victor Frankenstein's downfall. Then another aspect is how the novel Frankenstein is a critique of the Age of Enlightenment. So we have knowledge from science and rationality can have both positive and negative effects on society. Victor Frankenstein waffles on this point in his thinking and conversations with Walton. And we can think about, like, in contemporary terms, how this critique of the Age of Enlightenment, about like whether all this science and technology is really good or not, what are the ramifications of it, what are the effects of this on individuals and society. We can connect this to more contemporary times to think about the horrors of the 20th century. So like with World War II, for example, Germany developed terrible weapons, both of mass destruction, like with the V2 rocket, with their development of the death camps to institute their final solution to the Jews. These were all things done by science and technology that they had at their disposal. And they chose to use them for bad things rather than necessarily good things. And then with the United States at that time, we developed the atomic bomb before anyone else did. And then we used it on the Japanese at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And lots of hundreds of thousands of people died as a result of that. And now, in most contemporary terms, we live in the shadow of World War II and the development of the atomic bomb, now with thermonuclear weapons that are held by a number of nations around the world, some more stable than others. So there's this question of the same science that enables us to develop a vaccine, a number of vaccines to fight COVID-19, is also the science that enables us to create weapons that can kill people rather than save them. And so the power of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the novel, comes from its ambiguities and tone. Tone is like a tension between these opposite positions of the good of technology and the bad of technology, the good of science, the bad of science. And there's a certain ambiguity there. That maybe if done in the right way, some good can come out of this, but if done in an irresponsible way, it has these bad results. But I don't think that Mary Shelley herself is coming down definitively in one way, and that ambiguity, that uncertainty, is what allows us, the readers, to try to figure this out in our own minds and talk about it, like in a class or with others. That rather than just saying this is the way it is like opening up possibilities for us to think on our own and to discuss and talk about it on our own. Also, there's the influence of Mary Wollstonecraft, Mary Shelley's mom, and her father, William Godwin. Wollstonecraft plays a big role in terms of Elizabeth Lavenza. This is Victor Frankenstein's sister, who is educated alongside Victor in their youth, but she isn't able to capitalize on her intellect in the same way that Victor does by him going off to the University of Ingolstadt. And then also think of like Godwin's influence, because he was all about social justice and equality. And so we have these issues of justice that come up in the story, especially there's some criticism of Mary Shelley's naming of Justine with this name that's obviously related to justice. But maybe this is to really draw our attention to the injustice that's taking place when she is convicted of a crime that she did not commit. That had been orchestrated by the creature as a way to get back at Victor Frankenstein. And then also there's these different interpretations of doppelgangers in the novel. You're familiar with that term, doppelganger. Make sure you get this in your notes. Doppelganger, doppelganger. A doppelganger is a mirror of oneself, a doubling of oneself. And so in the novel, we have these doppelgangers between different characters. So Victor Frankenstein has a doppelganger in terms of his creature, that they mirror one another in certain ways. Also Walton, Captain Walton and Victor mirror one another in terms of their unquenchable thirst for knowledge. That Walton is putting his whole ship's crew in danger on this voyage to the Arctic. That Victor was willing to do anything to create this creature that he then disavows, and then of course serves as his nemesis later on. But there's also the doppelganger of Victor and Clerval, whereas Victor is pursuing scientific knowledge, Clerval is very much representing the Romantics, and this opposition in a sense of just rational thought and the pursuit of knowledge via scientific methods. That Clerval, he wants to go out and experience the world and then share these experiences as mediated by his mind. And so they're serving as opposites of one another in that regard. And then finally, I'll just say that there's these issues that I'm sure you've probably, if you've ever read Frankenstein before in a class, this is something that often comes up that's important to know about, is issues of community and social responsibility and of the dangers of isolation. That in all the times in which Victor Frankenstein is a part of a social group, of community, things are good. But once he isolates himself, both to build the creature and then in his attempt to build a mate for the creature, is where everything goes wrong. And so there's this power of community to, in a sense, maybe keep people on the straight and narrow path, to maybe be mindful of what it is you do has some effect on those around you. But when Victor is isolated, he makes a lot of bad choices that has consequences not just for himself, but for others that are in the communities that he comes from, both from his family and the communities at large. So there's a certain aspect of social responsibility that maybe is reinforced when you are a part of a community, whereas whenever you feel isolated or disconnected from that community, the concept of social responsibility maybe goes out the window. But I mean, these are some of the things that we can interrogate about the story and reflect on, that Mary Shelley is directing us towards through the story she tells us of Frankenstein. All right, so I think without getting too far ahead in the story, so that we can wrap it up in next week's lecture, I'll stop there with Frankenstein. So let me give you a reminder about your homework. So for next week, you need to finish Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. That will be chapters 19 through 24 and the concluding letters that follow chapter 24. There's like a line, and then you'll see some more letters between Walton and his sister, and that's where you also encounter his interaction with the creature. And then due by next week, that'll be due by next Wednesday, your weekly writing assignment, 250-word reply to the post that I'll do for week 3, in which you tell me what are the highlights from the lecture that you put down in your notes, and what are some of the highlights from your reading? What are thoughts that you have on Frankenstein so far? Do you have connections that you've made between Frankenstein and other movies, TV shows, comic books, music, anything in culture that you're aware of? Are there connections that you're making between Frankenstein and what you already know about? Tell me about those things. I think those things are interesting. And for all of you in the class, you should take some time to read each other's responses. I don't make this like a requirement of the class with us all being asynchronous in this way, because when we were in person, we would discuss this in class. But I think that each of you on your own can make the time to read each other's responses, see what other people are observing, and let some of those things that they observe become a part of what you know. Learn from one another, because you are all very smart people in my class. You all have a lot of different experiences, both from myself and from one another. And so you have a lot to add to our understanding and our thinking about science fiction by looking at what each other say on Open Lab. And as a part of that, there's no reason why you can't also connect with folks in the class. Now, again, this isn't required. This is you making the choice if you have the time and the energy to go above and beyond, but you can connect with one another in the class. And so like if I were to say, for example, go to our Open Lab course site and scroll down to like, our first weekly writing assignment where you introduced yourselves to one another. You guys wrote a lot of really great stuff about, not only about like who you are and what you know about in terms of science fiction, but some of the things that you are interested in terms of science fiction, whether it be video games, like here, Anthony's talking about Resident Evil, which is huge in terms of video games and also the way that it's been turned into a whole movie franchise, and is now being rebooted in a new movie franchise that I've heard about recently. J.G. Ballard, Philip K. Dick, really great writers, Kafka, and then other films like Star Wars, Fifth Element. So you're seeing like all these examples that you guys already know about that are important to you and you're thinking about science fiction. You guys can begin connecting to one another. If you want to reply to someone's response, just click reply and someone can say, hey Kevin, I'm also a big fan of the Fifth Element. If I were to reply to Kevin, I would tell him about how the 1998 Dragon Con, Harlan Ellison was there on stage and said that the Fifth Element was like the best science fiction movie in years, which any kind of praise coming from the writer Harlan Ellison was a really big deal back then. So I mean, anything that you find one another in the class or talking about that you have a connection to, reach out, make some community happen within our class. We don't have to be isolated the same way that Victor Frankenstein is in the novel, that we can use this medium of Open Lab to connect with one another. And I would encourage you to do that. I don't want you to feel like you have to be confined, that we can use this platform to also discuss and share and connect with one another about the topics of science fiction that we're learning about in our class. So I'll be posting this lecture Wednesday. I also want to remind you all that I have my virtual office hours on Wednesdays from 3 to 5. Nobody stopped by yet, so please, take advantage of that to touch base with me, to ask questions, or just talk about science fiction or anything related to school stuff that I can help you with. You can also reach me by email, jellis@citytech.cuny.edu. I don't want you to suffer in silence. If you got questions about the class, reach out to me. I'll get back to you as quickly as I can. Also, think about using virtual office hours or making an appointment with me by email outside of those office hours to talk about things related to the class. But also, if something comes up and you have to turn in an assignment late, that I don't want you to think it's the end of the world, because I want you to still do all the assignments no matter what, because it's always better to turn in something than nothing, okay? But if you turn something in late, let me know. Just send me an email, say, hey, Professor Ellis, sorry about turning this in late, had some stuff come up. You don't have to tell me what it was, just say you had things come up, turned it in late, can you check it off for me? That lets me know to go back after I've already checked off folks' work to find your stuff and then be able to give you some credit for that, okay? I don't mind doing that, but you just got to give me that heads up so I know to go back and do it, because the way that I'm doing checking on a weekly basis, I may not see that I need to go back and do something. So you help me help you. That's what it's all about, right? So keep that in mind, and I'll remind you about that throughout the semester. Coming up soon, just one final note, I'll talk with you all soon about thinking about the final research project in the class to give you all like gobs and gobs of time to work on that. So in a future lecture, I don't know if it'll be next week or maybe the week after, I'll go ahead and talk about like how to begin doing your research on that and what's involved in that, so you have plenty of time to work on it and also to ask me questions about it throughout the semester. So you're not like trying to do that at the last minute. I'm a firm believer of giving you all plenty of time to do the work in the class, stretch things out so that you're not like, getting in a bind and feeling like you're having to cram everything in at the very last second. So again, I hope everybody's doing well. I want you to remember that we're all in this together, okay? That this, there's no gotchas in my class. There's no curveballs I'm going to try to throw you. I want to see your success in the class, and I'm going to do what I can to ensure your success. But obviously, you're also going to have to bring your time, your energy, your motivation, your time planning to make it happen on your part too. But I think us working together can ensure that you do well in the science fiction class. So make sure you reach out to me. Remember to have office hours. The link is on our syllabus at the very top, so you can find that. Click that link, and that'll take you over to the Google Hangout where I have the office hours. So good luck, not just in our class, but with all your other classes. Stay well, take care of one another, and I'll talk with you all again very soon.